Hello and welcome to another episode of Who Knew in the Moment, the podcast. I'm your host, Phil Friedrich, and today I am honored to have Natalie Brunell with me. Natalie is a TV personality. She's growing in a phenomenal podcast herself and exploring new worlds in the crypto space. But something that I think is probably most paramount in her story, and I think we'll hear it today, is how she's overcome obstacles and never let the fact that she's not where she wants to be prevent her from where she wants to go. And so, Natalie, thanks so much for being on today.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. Looking forward to it.
You bet. So with your story, your family ends up immigrating to the United States in your younger years. So talk a little bit about that piece and I guess kind of just coming to the United States. I'm sure some of you is excited and some of you is a little bit nervous or apprehensive.
Yeah, for sure. I was 5 years old. My family was born in Poland. And so I have very vague memories of being born, growing up there and just spending a little bit of my childhood there. But yeah, my family always dreamed of coming to the US in pursuit of the American dream because my parents and my grandparents, they grew up under communism. So there was no sense of social mobility. There was very little economic opportunity. My mom would have to sometimes wait in very long lines just for basic necessities like food. Sometimes it would run out. So there was a lot of austerity and just a sense that if you wanted to pursue economic freedom and a better life for your family, you had to sort of figure out a way to get out of the country. And many people wanted to come to the US. So my mom would apply for the visa lottery every single year and she would try to come, and it didn't happen until she was in her late 30s and my dad was in his early 40s. And at that point, I really admire them because so many people would have just said, it's too late. We don't know the language. Starting over will be too hard. Yeah. But my parents, they had two kids, myself, my brother, and they said, you know what, a better life will be in the US for them and a better education will be there for them. So let's just go, let's risk it. And so they moved and I watched them work really, really hard. Being an immigrant, I'm really proud because you just are instilled with this very, very strong work ethic and a sense that you have to get a good education. You have to, just persevere because life is not easy and life isn't just handed to you. So I watched my parents work really, really hard. And then as I've shared in other shows, they were finally able to sort of achieve the American dream. They were able to afford a down payment and a mortgage on a small home in the suburbs of Chicago. So I moved there when I was in high school with my parents. And life was good for a couple of years. I saw them working and I was going to high school. And then I went off to college to pursue journalism because I wanted to become a broadcaster. And that side note on that is just, we grew up with the news and movies on all the time because it helped our whole family learn English. And so I always loved storytelling and I loved the idea of, for Hollywood, I loved the sense that like the good guy always wins and like there's a happy ending. And then with news, I just like the idea of learning and meeting people and like having an important role in a noble profession. But anyway, when I was in college, the financial crisis happened and my family just as quickly as they got the house, lost it. They lost everything overnight. They filed for bankruptcy. And so I graduated college right into a recession with my parents losing everything. And that was really formative as well, I think, because it planted a seed in my mind that something's fundamentally broken with our system and that the land of, economic opportunity and freedom and the American dream is maybe not as it seems. Maybe there's something under the surface that's broken. So I think I had that question in the back of my mind as I entered my journalism career. And it wasn't until like 8 years later that I discovered Bitcoin and started to connect the dots. But I don't know how much you want to go into it, but I basically spent about a decade reporting and being an investigative journalist where I was witnessing the cracks in society get bigger. I was witnessing the country getting more and more polarized because people felt left behind and frustrated and the cost of living was going up and all these problems were ballooning. And again, when I learned about Bitcoin, I was like, oh, wow, this is all related to our financial system and how rigged it is against the working class. And so that's why I became really passionate about Bitcoin.
Yeah. So she gave you an overview in about 8 minutes of her story. We're going to dive into a few of the different pieces and how we've moved through it. So rewinding to, parents and kind of seeing that progression through, talk a little bit about the work ethic that instilled in you, and just the, passion for wanting more, and where that came from.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, my dad would wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and okay, so we grew up outside Chicago, which is very cold. It's very, very cold.
Very cool.
And my dad would have to wake up even earlier than when he would have to leave for work because we didn't have a garage. We couldn't afford a place with a garage. So he would have to literally get up and scrape the car from all the ice and snow. And he would like have an extra key. He would turn it on so that the car would heat up and melt the snow. And then he would be getting ready, and then he would leave before the sun would rise. I mean, that was his work ethic, to go.
Yeah.
And my parents worked multiple jobs. They worked weekends. They worked really, really hard, and I saw their sacrifice. And I think that really sparked a fire in me. Yeah. Where number one, I did not want my future to be one of financial insecurity. And I just knew I had to do something with myself. And so I think that made me a hard worker, a good student. I wasn't the party kid. My parents never had to worry about me because I wanted to justify the sacrifice that my parents were making by being good to them, being good to just being a good, kid, so that I could go to school and hopefully get a job that will eventually help them. And it was really sad to see what happened to two people who played by all the rules, worked really, really hard, and then could lose their house overnight because of the decisions that were made by, massive corporations that could take on risk that was essentially, paid for by the taxpayers when it went wrong. And to see government bailed out all the big guys on Wall Street, but they didn't bail out families like mine. And so it like predisposed me to all the things that Bitcoin stands for.
Yeah. Now, as you're leaving college or exiting college in this tumultuous timeframe, what does that look like for you and your family coming together and trying to figure it out, right? I mean, sometimes people graduate college and they have to go back to their family, and here it's like, well, I might actually have to be a part of the solution to where my family's at.
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest shocks was basically graduating into that recession and making less money per hour than I was making at a high school internship. So that was like a big pill to swallow. There were very few jobs. News was it was an interesting career for me to choose because I was very passionate about it. And I do feel like I went down the right path based on my own just passion and skills. But it was also entering an industry that was fundamentally changing because of the internet. And so in the past, when people would enter my career, when it wasn't a recession and the internet wasn't taking over, it was actually a pretty lucrative job, even from the beginning, because so many people watch the news. Even in small markets, you can make a good salary. You had a photographer and an editor and all of that. And just literally within the 5 years or so that I was in school and the 4 years in college, everything changed. The business model turned on its head because all of a sudden they needed to compete with internet and advertising dollars. And so people became what's referred to as one-man band reporters. So you would have to be the shooter, the editor, the sound person, the writer, you were everything. And you made about a fifth of the salary. So I entered the workspace and people think it's this glamorous job. You're on television, and I was making like less than $30,000 a year. And so, my parents are struggling, I'm struggling, but I had this fire burning inside me where I was like, if only a couple people can make it to the top or make it to the national level, I'm going to be one of those people because I'm just going to outwork everybody else. And that's the only way I can do it. I don't have the background. I don't have the connections. I don't have the the Harvard degree, but I will outwork everybody because of that work ethic, I think.
Yeah. Now, to that point, you enter into the industry and all of a sudden you're working and there's an opportunity within NBC that you get to kind of walk into and, probably not walk into, compete for, but talk about that opportunity with NBC and then into CNN.
Oh yeah. So my career trajectory was basically, I ended up going to grad school because with the recession and the job market, I wanted to, I had gotten into grad school, and for an immigrant family, for me to have a master's, it was something that was going to make my mom and dad really proud. And I thought it would make me more marketable and hopefully like get through some of the economic downfall.
Yeah.
So I got my master's degree in communication and journalism from Northwestern back home. And then I got a behind the scenes job at CNN. I applied for a fellowship, and one person gets that fellowship every single year. And I was the recipient that year. So I graduated, had a behind the scenes job at CNN, kind of learned what it's like to work at a cable network from behind the scenes. And during that time, I made an on-camera reel, which is how you basically, it's like a resume, but it's a video. And that's how you get a job in the news world.
Yeah.
And that got me my first on-camera job in a small market, Palm Springs in California, outside of LA. So I worked at an ABC affiliate there. I reported on public corruption. I became their investigative reporter, and I uncovered a lot of just illicit business deals and things that ended up actually going to court. And a local mayor was indicted on like 33 counts of public corruption as the result of some of my reporting. And that, I think that story actually ended up getting me my job at the NBC in Sacramento, which was a really big jump, because in TV markets, they're kind of ranked based on the size of the city and the size of how many television households there are. So I went from a market of like 150 in Palm Springs to 20, which is Sacramento,
Wow.
the state capital, which was a big jump. Yeah. And then I got to report there on state policy and go a little bit deeper with, state politics and learning a lot about just everything happening in California. And then from there, I got a job at ABC News as a national correspondent. So I was based in Los Angeles and traveled the country covering, I mean, you can imagine, I literally anything and everything, tragedies, mostly mass shootings, natural disasters, massive fires, hurricane, funerals of presidents. I mean, just literally everything. And then from there, I became an investigative reporter at a new news network that started up in LA. And that's when I started my Bitcoin podcast and ultimately transitioned.
Yeah. So earlier you mentioned not everyone's going to get to this opportunity to be one of the top people in my industry, but I knew I wanted to get there. I think a lot of people say I want to get there, but then aren't willing to do all of the work it takes to get there. There was a lot of, and then I transitioned, and then I transitioned, then I transitioned in your story. Talk about that piece for somebody that's listening that says, gosh, I feel like I've got a desire to get here, but I also feel like I've been working at it 2 or 3 years. I'm not where I want to be. What would be some motivation and encouragement of, hey, you're not there yet, but you might be on the way?
Yeah, I mean, I just think that perseverance is key. And if you really want something, I think you're going to have that fuel, have that fire that, allows you to keep going even when it's hard. I mean, in my 20s, I worked literally nights and weekends and the worst hours. I really sacrificed a lot of my personal life. I wasn't making a lot of money, but I was just really hungry. And I think a lot of that was because of what I saw happen to my parents. I just was determined to not let that happen to me. And I do think that as I've talked to so many people about their backstories and their origins and these, overcoming obstacles, I found that the people who tend to become the most successful have really faced struggle and looked it dead in the eye and conquered it. And I feel like my life is definitely an example of that. But really, it's just, I think that people have to be honest with themselves of what they're willing to put in and what their priorities are and what they are willing to sacrifice, because some of these, some of the aspects of climbing to the top of any industry is not for everyone.
Right.
For some people, they do want to focus more on family or a certain schedule or certain, personal life things. For me, I was just work, and I have to get to a certain position so that I could be financially secure. And then what's interesting too is, even though I really felt like I was in the right industry, I wasn't fully happy reporting on what I was reporting on, because I just felt, especially in the last few years of my journalism career, like I wasn't helping the world in any way. I felt like I was just kind of there to be on television, which fewer and fewer people were watching, to basically regurgitate the facts that someone could have read, in an article or on Twitter. And it was always so tragic. And and I wasn't able to sort of share my own thoughts on why things were happening. And that was hard. It was becoming harder and harder to be this sort of like neutral third party. Cause I did learn a lot of lessons, and I felt like there are reasons why some of this is happening, but yet I can't vocalize them. And when I learned about Bitcoin, when I started to understand the financial system, I basically created a situation where I could be really true to myself and be more authentic and start to express my views and my opinions on something that I do think will help the world. And so I pivoted from I felt like kind of like a corporate journalist where I couldn't share everything I wanted to share, to someone who is an individual content creator and can say whatever I want that's based on the homework that I've done, the research that I've done, that I really, really believe in.
Yeah. So how long ago did you start in that journey? Obviously, the world of, cryptocurrency has been around over a decade now, and everyone has kind of began to learn about it in differing amounts, over the last really 10 years. But talk a little bit about when that idea was brought to you and your original thoughts in getting into that.
Yeah, I wish I learned about it 10 years ago. That would have been awesome. Because I was in college when Bitcoin was invented, and man, oh man, I wish someone had just said that word to me so that I could be like, "What's that?" No. So I learned about Bitcoin in 2017 for the first time. I had friends that worked in Silicon Valley in San Francisco, and they were talking about investing on Coinbase and losing money on Mt. Gox, and just they started to talk about crypto. And so I started to ask questions. I pitched a story about Bitcoin in Sacramento and ended up doing one story. And I was really skeptical. Like most people, I looked at the whole industry as, oh, this is, a form of gambling, or this could all go to zero. It's digital. So how can it really be trusted? It could be hacked. I had all of the questions that I now, the myths that I now dispel in my work. And it wasn't until someone handed me the Bitcoin Standard, the book, that I really started to understand and open my eyes and do the work that I really needed to go down the rabbit hole. I read that book and it was life-changing for me. And it's funny too, because I had kind of like held back from reading the Bitcoin Standard for a while because I thought it was just a technical book about computer science or programming. And I was like, I really don't have the time. I don't want to read this. And I had a mentor that just said, please read it. It's not just about Bitcoin. It's about money. It's about our financial system. It's about what happened to your parents. And I was like, okay, you said the right keywords. So, okay. So I read it, and it's true. I mean, it's a book really about how money works, how our financial system works, how money printing works, why things have gotten to become these big bubbles that we see in housing and real estate, all of it. And I said, wow, Bitcoin actually might be the solution to this. So then I went down, I started studying Bitcoin nonstop, before work, in the middle of work, after work, every podcast, every book, I just devoured. And it was a really big transformational time for me, which is why I wanted to start the podcast, because I felt like this is what I should be reporting on. Like if I've built all these skills as a communicator, as a speaker, as an educator, this is what I should focus the spotlight on, because this is actually what will fix so many of the societal issues that I've been reporting on as a journalist. So it was a multi-year journey for me. I've now been in Bitcoin since 2017, but been a podcaster just a year in the space.
Yeah. Now, making the leap from what you were doing to what you are doing, talk about that. I think sometimes people are nervous to make big changes in careers and things because maybe their close circle says, what the heck are you doing? You're doing so well at this. Why would you, look to make changes? But talk about that in your instance and what your world was saying.
Yeah. I just think it's important to follow your gut and take chances, because in my life, what I've come to realize is that you will regret more the things that you didn't do than the things that you do that maybe fail, and you get at least a life lesson from them. As a reporter, you learn to be very persistent, because you have to ask people probably on the worst day of their life to talk to you. And you have to have that courage to just go up to someone and say, hey, can I give you an opportunity to just share your thoughts, or can we talk? And you get a lot of doors slammed in your face. So you kind of understand what it feels like to have rejection. And you also realize that it's really not that big of a deal. Like if the answer is no, at least you ask. Cause if you never ask, then like you won't know if you have that opportunity or not. So I became someone who always at least had to ask the question or take the chance.
Yeah.
And I felt like, again, I was being most true to myself if I pursued this mission and this job. I felt like this is an area where there is a need. There's a need for more communicators who understand how to talk to a general audience. And this could actually fix some things that are broken. And I want to be a part of that mission, even if it were to fail, which I don't think it will long term. Even if it's hard, I plan to basically live off savings for a year, and I ended up not having to do that. But I think that sometimes if something's in your gut, it's worth the risk because, time is precious and life is short, and you just don't know until you try something, and failure can be a great lesson. There's a lot of people that failed and brushed themselves off and moved on to the next thing. And so many of, I think, the best stories that we hear are like that. So I think it's just the willingness to have the door slammed in your face, to be told no, and to keep going. People, I think the more that you try things, the more that you're willing to try more things. And like, it feeds on itself. It's like a very positive feedback loop.
Yeah. Now, as you were saying that, so many times we fear what someone's going to say about us. One, we don't even know that they're going to say it, right? Or two, we don't even know that they did say it. But that's one of the things that can hold us back. What would be encouragement to somebody that's listening that is in a spot, man, I want to make this choice, but I'm just nervous what someone's going to say about me if I do it?
That is a question that hits very close to home for me, because when you put yourself in a position of being in front of the public, like being on television, you basically make yourself vulnerable to a lot of attacks. And anyone that's watching this can probably imagine how horrible people on social media and just, being able to hide behind a computer screen can be. I've been told the most horrible things about my voice, my appearance, my work, all of it. And being a woman, I'm sensitive to that because everybody wants to feel beautiful and like they're on the right path. And so it can be very, very hard. The thing you kind of remember is that the people who take the time to do something like that probably have serious issues in their own lives, and they're just using you as like an outlet and trying to attack you to bring you down because there's something wrong with them. And also, I just urge people to think, like, how much do you actually think about other people, right? Like, I think we sometimes worry so much about the opinions of others when in reality, everyone's just caught up and tied up in their own stuff and worrying about their lives, their kids, their families. Everybody's got stress, especially nowadays. So I think that we worry too much when other people probably aren't giving us that much thought. So I urge people to not think about that, to really ignore the noise and focus in on the tribe around you that is positive and does encourage you. And there's a great saying that says you will never be criticized by someone doing more than you. You will only be criticized by someone doing less. So don't take that criticism to heart.
Yeah. That's so good. And I also think, it's important to have a group of people that you really trust, respect, that you can, bounce ideas off of and you can learn from, and take those pieces of information to heart because they're probably giving you good advice. On the other hand, unsolicited advice, maybe throw it through the thought process of, all right, is this for me or not? And then just let it go, opposed to really, holding on or harboring that.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're going to get good advice. You're going to get bad advice. I think it's important to seek, feedback. For me, some of the areas that I've seen the most growth in is because I've sought constructive feedback and criticism. Like when I was a young reporter, I wanted to know from the older anchors and the seasoned veterans, like, how was I doing? Where could I improve? I think one of the reasons why I was successful in what I did is because I was such a student of my own craft. I would actually, this is so nerdy, but I would watch the news every single day because I worked in news. I would watch the national shows. I would compare them. So I would watch ABC and NBC and CBS to see how the same story was covered by the three different outlets. Yeah. And I would sometimes even pick my favorite. Like if I thought a story was really well told, well produced, well written, I would literally find it either on TV where I recorded it or find it online. And I would transcribe the script so I can see exactly how the script was written written and where they made like certain choices in the writing and the words. And I studied it. And so I have like a binder of old stories that I transcribed from the national networks. And I tried to embody that style and tried to like mimic some of the word choices. And I grew that way, you know, and so that took work, but I think you need to put in that effort and seek advice from people that are masters of whatever the craft is. I really truly believe that more people need to reach out and find mentors. And I've encouraged my students to do that because I've taught for a couple of years at USC, and I tell them, listen, if there's someone that you admire, there's like a reporter, a correspondent, a producer, a director, whatever it is. Everybody has social media nowadays. Everybody has email addresses. Try to track them down and say, hey, you know, I would love your advice. I'd love to pick your brain for 10 minutes. I'll buy you coffee. Like, I admire you. I think your work is amazing. Do you have any advice? 9 times out of 10, actually, people do respond because people love to be complimented and flattered, and people like to help others. Right. And like, people don't take advantage of that. And I've done that my whole entire career. I will write to any stranger, and you know, it's really paid off. So I recommend that people try the same strategy.
Yeah. Not nerdy. It says a lot about you and how you got to where you're at, right? Not nerdy at all. I mean, you think about, let's just look at a sports team, right? I mean, that is part of practice, is you have to break down game film. You have to watch that. So yeah, it's not a sport, it's, you know, the news, but once again, it's your profession. It's what you're going into. So I love that. Now, into your podcast, once again, we're a little over a year into that, I think, and you have been able to bring on some of the biggest thought leaders in the industry. And my guess is there might be a little bit of a hint that you just gave of encouragement you give your class going on there. So talk a little bit about that and, you know, really what you cover, you know, in your different episodes. Once again, I know there's a multitude of things, but.
Yeah. So it's basically the message I've been touching on. It was just taking the chance of reaching out to people that I really admired and looked up to and that shaped my Bitcoin journey. Basically, you know, I'd always been a fan of the podcast format because I love long form interviews, and I would get to do long form interviews pretty much every day for my job. But what resulted on television that people would see is like a minute or 2 minutes, right? Everything gets left on the cutting room floor except the most important points. And so I love those like long form, beautiful interviews where you really learn about people. I love origin stories and biographies and autobiographies. So when I learned all about Bitcoin and I studied the network and the technology, there were a lot of big voices that I came across who had their own journeys. And I was just really curious about them because I felt like they were so smart and so well-researched and so articulate about Bitcoin. But I always wondered, you know, like, well, where did they come from? What are their stories? You know, where are they from? What jobs did they have? How did they build their careers? And so I thought to myself, well, I don't see anything in the space that really talks about Bitcoin and the headlines and all of it, but also has sort of a human interest angle of like, who are these big voices that are very influential? I mean, if you think about it, if Bitcoin takes off, these are the people that like led that battle and that mission. And I wanted to learn more about them personally. So I started to reach out, and I just thought, you know, I'm going to put together, I didn't even think it was going to be a permanent podcast. I thought it was just going to be a season of a different podcast that I had. And I just thought, you know, I want to hear who they are and where they're from. So I started to reach out to all of them, Michael Saylor and Saifedean Ammous, who wrote the Bitcoin Standard, and Pomp and Robert Breedlove, and just all these very, very well-known in the Bitcoin space voices. And they responded and said, yes. And, you know, so I wanted to offer the audience, whoever the audience would be, a chance to get to know these people who are really fighting the fight for Bitcoin and helping educate the public. And now I'm 72 episodes in, and now it's my career, and I'm just kind of in shock, but I'm super grateful as well, because clearly it resonated with some people.
Yeah. So talk about that, you know, once again, similar idea of what you were doing on the reporting side in the beginning in this, right? It would be great to say I was Joe Rogan day one, but Joe Rogan wasn't Joe Rogan day one, right? You know, you start with an episode and you get some feedback and it takes off, or you see, maybe I need to make a pivot or adjustment here. Talk about that in your world and some of the things that have helped really escalate what you're doing.
Yeah. So I launched the podcast at the Bitcoin conference last year. And again, I had no expectation from it. I
Yeah.
just, it was a passion project for me.
Yeah.
If someone would have asked me back then, like, oh, like what, what's your dream job? I probably would have said something like, oh, like Joe Rogan has, a dream job, but it's so out of the realm of possibility to me because he's so big.
Yeah.
But anyway, I launched it. I recorded a couple of episodes. I'm lucky in the fact that, I studied videography and all of this technology. So it was easy for me to like put it together. I knew how to edit. I did it all by myself. It's just, everyone thinks like I hired some, no, I did it by myself. I took my podcast, like cover photo on my iPhone outside of my apartment in the hallway. And like, I did it all by myself.
The behind the scenes.
Yeah, totally. I like ordered a really cheap Amazon shirt. I went to the printing press and got a Bitcoin B on it so that I could have a Bitcoin shirt on my cover. All of it. It's just, I put it together just on my own with very little budget. And so I wanted to have a surplus of episodes so that I could release one every single week and try to get more people on. And that's literally what happened. So as I started to release the episodes, people were excited to learn about these individuals and their stories. And so then I could use that to try to request more, and more people started to follow me. Again, like positive feedback loop, one thing led to another. I went to the Bitcoin conference, which was a great investment for me because I got to meet people in person and like show them who I am in real life and say, hey, I would love to have you on my show. And so I got some more guests that way. I started to be quoted in articles. And so it was like slowly, but surely. And then I had the opportunity to essentially monetize it and make that decision. Do I want to stay and be a journalist for a network and stay in that sort of corporate environment? Or do I want to take a chance and build my own business? And I decided to take a chance and build my own business. So I'm super, super grateful that I've been able to do it so far, even though Bitcoin's price is not doing so well right now.
That's a whole different topic. We need an episode for that. But, one thing that I do want to zero in on that you mentioned earlier was, you said, hey, I've got a year's worth in savings and that's my plan. Like I'm burning the boats, but I at least know for the next year, like I can make this work. Now there's some sacrifices that have to come with saying, hey, I've got a year's worth of living, in the savings account. Doesn't mean I can probably splurge on everything that I might have splurged on when I had a paycheck coming in each and every month. So talk about being willing to give up some of the things that you want for making sure you can accomplish what you want most.
Yeah. I mean, I think that sometimes you have to sacrifice, and I'm almost, I guess, lucky in the sense that I've known what it's like to literally have nothing. So it's not a big, I've basically lived, in a situation where I'm barely affording rent, and it's just, my family struggled a lot. So to me, it wasn't going to be some sort of new, crazy, different environment that I'm not used to. But I just believed in Bitcoin so much. I thought this is something everyone should know about, and it could fix so many of the issues in our society and in our financial system. It can essentially allow us to just reprogram our economy and the way that we transact and like the way we provide value. And so I just thought, I'm going to see what happens in a year. I have enough. I was always a really good saver.
Yeah.
So I was like, I just, even if I have to just pay rent and get through my expenses, my savings essentially that I was going to use was just rent. And then like a little bit on food and just basics. I didn't have a car because I was literally putting more money into Bitcoin. So I didn't have a car. I didn't have gas expenses. And I thought, if after a year it fails, then I'll try to go back maybe to the news world or, see what other opportunities exist. And I just jumped off the cliff and said, I'll build a parachute on the way down.
I think there's power in that though, right? Sometimes it's not about, or I think sometimes people try and have this perfect plan, and then all of a sudden you can never get it completely perfect, right? Because things happen. And so the more time you spend trying to make the perfect plan, the less time you spend in doing the plan, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I don't know who said this, and I don't know if it's a famous person's quote, but if you have a plan B, it distracts from plan A. So
Yeah.
I feel like sometimes people splinter themselves off and they're so nervous about things not working out that they come up with all these contingency plans when the reality is there's something burning inside their core that makes them feel alive and passionate. And if they just put all that energy and all that focus on that thing, it would probably be okay, even if there's short-term sacrifice or short-term loss. And so that's essentially what I decided to do with Bitcoin. It's like, yeah, well, I could I could stay at this safe job, or I could explore a different news job, or I could do this or that. But like, my passion is Bitcoin. My skill set is communication. Let's mold the two together and like, let's see what happens. And I think that, it requires risk sometimes, and sometimes building something new, and sometimes things fail, and sometimes they work out. So we'll see what happens.
Well, and not even only the splitting of like time and attention, like you mentioned, but if you have a plan B, I think when the going gets tough, it's really easy to say, maybe I'll just
Yeah.
pivot. Whereas if this is my thing, right? Like my back's up against the wall, I'm going to figure out a way to make this work, opposed to, oh, well, it's getting kind of murky, or it's getting kind of hard, I should just pivot to this other plan that I've had.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think if you leave yourself with those exit valves, you might end up taking one and regretting it, because there's always an easier way, right? It's always
Yep.
easier probably to quit. It's always easier to just settle. And it really takes, I think, some mental fortitude to say, no, I'm going to keep going, even if this is hard. And I truly like, I'm someone who just has watched so many movies and listened to so many stories and interviewed so many people. And those are the stories that are the most inspiring, the kind of pursuit of happiness, like
Yeah.
all the odds are stacked against you, but you still believed and you went forward, and like, eventually it worked out. And that might've taken a couple months, a couple years, a decade. Like, everybody's journey and timeline is so different. And I think we need to stop comparing ourselves to others, because comparison is really the death of joy. And I know it's so easy to compare ourselves with social media and stuff, but we're all on our own journeys. And at the end of our lives, we're not going to be thinking about those other people. We're going to be like reflecting on ourselves, the choices we made, the dreams we pursued. And I really believe that people need to just, be strong and like pursue what they want to pursue, take some chances, and be a good person along the way, because that's important too. I've never ever believed that you should cut other people down, or, or be jealous of other people's successes. You should celebrate them and learn from them and grow. And I think we need more of that type of energy and attitude.
Nailed it. Absolutely. Now, the other thing you mentioned was with your wanting to learn, your desire to learn. Sometimes that requires a financial investment in something. Oftentimes, though, people look at that as an expense, right? Well, gosh, Phil, I'm really trying to conserve my money. I probably shouldn't spend $2,000 to go to this conference. Like, that seems counterintuitive. But really, well, no, that $2,000, when invested in the right thing, can actually be the platform to $100,000, right? It's an investment. Talk about that decision-making process for you, and once again, some of the fruits that have come from that.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think that it's important to be able to save and allocate that capital for something productive in the future. That is actually the core and heart of capitalism, which I think we've lost that sense a little bit, because all we do
Mm.
is go into debt in our country. But yeah, I think you have to invest in yourself, and you have to look at things as expenses that in the future could pay off, because sometimes it takes money to make money. And I think a lot of people would agree with that. So yeah, for me, it was an investment in myself and in my future business to go to the Bitcoin conference and make those introductions and meet people. And again, like, I budgeted pretty carefully, and I was a good saver, and I knew what I could spend and what I needed to save. But I was definitely willing to take the financial risk, and in some ways to devote some time and energy to the brand or to the show that I was building. And I think that people just have to know their budget and know their limits. And sometimes, what if you did an extra side thing to make a little bit of extra money so that you can allocate that to investing something in your business? But every business requires capital. You need equipment. I needed to have a podcast microphone and this and that. And so those are investments that do pay off, because then the quality is better and then more people want to listen because they get value out of it. So it's like, again, you have to make smart choices when it comes to money, but I definitely believe in investing in your business for sure.
Yes. Well, Natalie, what is next? What is on the horizon that we can be gearing up for in your story? What are you working on?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I hope to grow my show. I have a great guest, a couple of great guests this month that I'm really excited about. Nick Carter's my latest guest on the show, and he was a really big get. I reached out to him for like a year and finally got him. So
Resilience.
Yeah. And then I'm launching a new show with Swan Studios and Bitcoin Magazine. It's going to be called Hard Money. And that's going to be really cool because right now, if you watch financial news, it's a lot about stocks and the traditional markets and maybe a little bit of crypto, but it really, the anchors, the reporters, they're not that well versed in Bitcoin or really understand how it intersects with the greater financial picture. And so we created a show. We created a Bitcoin news show that I get to anchor and host. I'm really grateful for that. So that launches this week. And if you want to follow me, you can, head on Twitter. I'm at Nat Brunell, or you can go to my website, talkingbitcoin.com.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for being on. I'm super excited to watch your journey and can't wait to do this where we get to highlight all the pivotal moments here in probably another year or two.
Yeah, thank you so much. Good luck.